They didn't fly them there, they brought them in ships. And we thought they were bringing supplies, and they're bringing missiles. So why wouldn't we think that these are full of missiles? Well, President Kennedy was scheduled to visit Connecticut the next day on Wednesday, October 17th, and he wanted to cancel his agenda because of this crisis. Good or bad? Bad. Why would that be bad? Well, you get the media now, right? I mean, you got the news is following the president, the TV, and they're going to wonder why he's not following his schedule. And they don't want anything leaked on this. They don't want to panic. And so even though Kennedy wants to cancel his events, both Bobby Kennedy and Kenneth O'Donnell convince him to go on as normal because they believe if he doesn't go on as normal, that the press is going to find out about the situation in Cuba, and they do not want him to find out. They do not want panic. And there's another reason they don't want him to get it out in the press, and I'll tell you why later, because it's crucial. So let's move to Wednesday, October 17th, and find out what happens. Well, before Kennedy departs for Connecticut, he's got some things he's got to do. First of all, he goes to a breakfast service at St. Matthew's Cathedral. That's what he does right off the bat. He goes to a breakfast service at St. Matthew's Cathedral. You'll get an opportunity to see that beautiful cathedral. Then he deals with some other government business, and then he finally has lunch with the Crown Prince of Libya. And once he does those things, he boards Air Force One and heads for Connecticut. So he gets up in the morning, he attends a breakfast service at St. Matthew's Cathedral, he does some other governmental chores, he has lunch with the Crown Prince of Libya, L-I-B-Y-A, and then he boards Air Force One and flies to Connecticut. Now, what's happening while he's in Connecticut? XCOM is getting together to continue their discussion about possible options other than military force. Why would they just not go in there and bomb the hell out of them and invade? Why wouldn't they do that? Well, what's that? Well, not yet. How does it look? Why?
No one knows why.
Well, somebody in the other class used the B word that we always say. It looks like we are what, Cuba? Bullying them. And the man that was most concerned was Robert Kennedy. He said, you know what? This isn't going to go over well. This is going to be a great big country sneak attacking a smaller country. We're going to get no support across the globe. And he's thinking of the United Nations. You know what I mean? We're not going to get any support. So during the president's absence, XCOM meets to discuss other possible options rather than the airstrikes followed by invasion. And Robert Kennedy was very concerned that a sneak attack by the United States on a much smaller country would be seen as very unpopular around the world. So he receives a lot of pressure from the committee, especially the military, to do what? To airstrike and invade. And he finally shakes his head and he looks at Secretary of Defense Bob McNamara, and this is what he says. You do not have to write it down, just listen. Envision this in your mind. They're in this meeting, the military's pressing for airstrikes and invasion. Bobby Kennedy's afraid of that. It looks like a big country's picking on a little country. It's not going to be seen very popular worldwide. And so Bobby turns to Secretary of State Bob McNamara and he says, Bob, if we go ahead with these airstrikes, you know what it'll come to in the end. There's got to be something else. Give it to me. And what he's saying is, you guys are the Department of Defense. You have not planned a scenario if there ever ended up being missiles in Cuba. I mean, we've had this standing Cold War issue with Russia. We know that Cuba's communist. You guys must have been thinking of something. And McNamara responds by saying, yes, there had been a scenario discussed if this happened. And what it did is it called for a naval blockade of all ships into Cuba. So when Bobby Kennedy presses Secretary of Defense McNamara for a better option, McNamara does respond with a scenario that had called for a naval blockade of all ships into Cuba. Well, Kennedy returns to Washington, D.C. from his Connecticut appearance, and he will sit down on Thursday, October 18th with XCOM to see where they're at about possible options to deal with this crisis in Cuba, which will take us to Thursday, October 18th. And on Thursday, October 18th, President Kennedy is scheduled to meet with XCOM to discuss what they're going to do. Right now, their options are what? Airstrikes followed by invasion or a naval blockade of Cuba. Okay? With that said, we're going to stop and we are going to celebrate Veterans Day yesterday with some heartwarming videos that I think you just need to see.